This is Dovid Margolin, Chief Editor of Chabad.org.
Sure. Okay. Let's do it. I think I brought too many papers in general. Okay. So the subject is Hasidic art. What is Hasidic art, and kind of what is the Rebbe's what is the Rebbe's vision for Hasidic art, and what does that mean? So kind of takes us back to a place of what is Jewish art in the first place. So while I was researching, I wrote a long article for Chabad.org about the Rebbe's, and I kind of started delving into. I thought I would find a few little things. Ended up kind of being a year of work of just digging into, and kind of the deeper that I looked, the more that I found, and that there's a comprehensive theory. And just to start off, there was a art critic, Harold Rosenberg, Jewish, obviously. He in 1966 spoke at the Jewish Museum in Manhattan, and a few months later, his talk was turned into an essay that was published in Commentary. And just to start off, because it was very interesting, he asks, "Is there a Jewish art?" That's the title of the article. And first, they build a Jewish museum. Then they ask, "Is there a Jewish art?" Jews. As to the question itself, there is a Gentile answer and a Jewish answer. The Gentile answer is, yes, there is a Jewish art, and no, there is no Jewish art. The Jewish answer is, what do you mean by Jewish art? So then he spends a few thousand words discussing what is Jewish art, going through style, various different angles that you could come up with. And he concludes, and this is where I want to go to, because I think that kind of is a good jumping off point. He concludes with, returning to the real world, I believe we are obliged to conclude that there is no Jewish art in the sense of a Jewish style in painting and sculpture. Whether there ever will be such a style is a matter of speculation, a speculation that ought to take into account the progressive fading of national styles in modern art generally. So he's just describing kind of the trends that are going on at that time in general. And then he says, and this is, I think, a very important paragraph, still, creation in Jewish art has been very vital in this century. And the important thing is that while Jewish artists have not been creating as Jews, they have not been working as non-Jews either. Their art has been the closest expression of themselves as they are, including the fact that they are Jews, each in his individual degree. So when we discuss what the Rebbe's role ultimately, and I hope that we'll be able to see that, is that the Rebbe comes to define what Harold Rosenberg is not able to define. He comes and says, the art critic says, there obviously isn't a unique Jewish art style. There isn't something that you can point to and say, this is technique. There isn't such a thing. But there is a spirit that obviously has animated Jewish art for a long time. Certainly the contribution of Jewish artists in the 19th and 20th centuries and today is something to take into account, to see. And therefore, there's something there, and it has something to do with Judaism, but he's not able to define what it is. And that's kind of what the Rebbe comes to do. That's the revolutionary addition that the Rebbe has, is to define what it means to actually be a Jewish artist. So we're going to start off with and now I want to say one thing. I'm going to be using the term Hasidic art and Jewish art. Hasidic art, in my view, is not, and I believe in the Rebbe's view, is not about painting a shtetl or a certain scene of traditional life. It's not even a Hasidic artist who is painting or sculpting or whatever it is. It's something that is vivifying Jewish art. So if there is a Jewish art, then the same way that Chassidus comes and is there to vivify Jewish life and to enliven and enlighten Jewish life in the first place as a whole, so Hasidic art is kind of doing the same thing with Jewish art. It is putting the soul into the process. So we're going to start off with this is a painting by a Hasidic artist named Handel Lieberman. Handel Lieberman was born in 1900 to a Lubavitcher family in a village near Polotsk in what's today Ukraine, then the Russian Empire. And as a young man, he was sent, and actually, this is what he looked like later. He didn't always look like that. This is just something, as I was researching, I found this is very interesting. This is his kind of biographical details where he writes his name. His name was not Lieberman, it was Futterfass. His brother was the very famous Chabad Mashpia Mendel Futterfass, and Lieberman later changed his last name in order to escape the Soviet Union, so he went by that last name. And you can see that it says, "Where did you go to yeshiva?" And he writes Tempe Tmimim Lubavitch. From what year? From 1911 to 1916. And then here it says, "What's your job?" This is written. This is a card that he filled out in the 60s, and it says over here, "Hudozhnik." It's a Russian word in Yiddish, and in Russian he writes again, "Hudozhnik," that he's an artist. So the fact that he was there from 1911 to 1916 is telling. He was an artist as a kid. He doodled. He wrote. He drew in the front of his chumash and in wherever he can, whatever he can get his hands on. His father passed away, I think he was 7, 8 years old. And either way, his mother sent him at the age of 11 to study in the Lubavitch Yeshiva in Lubavitch, in Tomchei Tmimim, in the Lubavitch Yeshiva that was in the village of Lubavitch. He's an artistic kid. This is a time of revolution, and he wants to be involved with art and got very serious at it. And there was a Hasidic writer, Heshka Dubrovsky, who wrote that he wrote a profile of him in Yiddish, and this is a translation. At about this age, as he's 13, 14, 15 years old, his artistic yearnings began to flower, and young Handel was attracted to the outside world, which beckoned with increased intensity. So he wants to leave. He wants to go somewhere, and there's a conflict for him. There's a conflict between what he's growing up with and where he wants to go. One is he likes the yeshiva life, or he likes the way of a religious Jew, but he's also obviously looking for the modern world, which is, if he wants to pursue art in any serious way, that's in the world beyond. And he ran away from Lubavitch once or twice. His mother, a single mother with a bunch of kids, went and found him and schlepped him back. But ultimately, you can see that by 1916, he was, as he writes himself, 1916, I was out. So by the 20s, he was in Moscow, and he was drawing. He got married. He was struggling to make a living. But you see, these are pieces that he drew in the early 1920s, and this one actually won him an award, a scholarship to a prestigious Moscow art school, and I believe it's this one at least. And that's where he went. He went there. By the time World War II came, yes.
But presumably as the only Jew in the art institute.
Certainly not the only Jew. No. We're no, definitely not the only Jew. There's a lot of Jews. There's a lot of Jewish. This is the Soviet times. There's a lot of Jews who are fully involved. Early Soviet era also. So in the early Soviet era, Jews were much more had many more possibilities open to them. Later, it got a little tougher, but during this period, definitely, like, part of all the avant-garde, everything that's going on, that's exciting in the art world, that's in all the arts, where Jews were heavily involved with, and that's what you can see. Even what he's doing here is not like your standard. He's playing around with Cubism, and he played around with styles his entire life, actually. He ultimately went to the army. The World War II breaks out. He goes to the army. He was to the Red Army. He goes on to the fights on the German front. Was injured a few times. Came out of the army and to discover that his wife and 2 children had been killed by the Nazis. So he salvaged whatever he could of his art. He went to rejoin the Hasidic community that he knew, the Chabad community that was, by that time, at least the nucleus of it, had moved to Samarkand, in Samarkand, Tashkent, in Uzbekistan, in Soviet Uzbekistan, Soviet Central Asia. where he basically rejoined the community. He doesn't have anything else. He has his art, and that's basically it, right? His wife and kids are gone. Oh, sorry, this is just the avant-garde of the day. This is a Modigliani, this is Chagall. So he comes back to Samarkand, and from Samarkand he goes on to, in 1946, the Chabad community takes a very unusual step and basically escapes together. About 1,200 people altogether were able to forge, using mostly forged Polish documents, were able to leave, and he left. That's when he changed his name to Lieberman, and he moved with them. A very interesting, he actually says later on in an interview that he was carrying around whatever art that he had with him and holding it, very tightly, and it was lost at some point while he was in a DP camp in Austria. And basically, he said, with that, he lost all of his will to live. Okay. He gets to Paris. Finally, they found it. He gets to Paris and he writes a letter to the sixth Rebbe, to Rebbe Yosef Yitzchak of Lubavitch. And he writes, can I reconcile these two different worlds? Now I'm here, I'm back over here. This is my life. Art, as he had always been told, was not something that he could engage with. So, how do you reconcile these two things? And he got a warm blessing, and that was kind of the beginning. So the question that we can ask is, what exactly is what's the conflict between Hasidic life or traditional Jewish life in general and art? So we'll start off with Sinai. The second commandment is very clear, right? There's 10 commandments, as we all know. The second commandment says that you shall not make for yourself a graven image, nor any manner of likeness of anything that is in heaven above, that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. So, and then the commentator Rashi actually explains specifically, it's talking about the words that are used refer specifically to both sculpture and to depiction, to painting, to drawing. So there's already, we're talking about an inherent conflict between, we have one God, don't depict anything, and or at least the way the pasuk says it, and the commentators go on to explain what that really means, and we're just going to do the basics because it's important just to be able to cover it. But really, this is a difficult subject that rabbis need to discuss. Like people who are involved with it have to kind of, but on a very basic level, you cannot create or own any form that is related to idolatry. Anything which is three-dimensional is in particular treated much more suspiciously. So three-dimensional objects are all the more. Reliefs also, kind of carved reliefs, are also some. And it's also forbidden in terms of the four faces of the divine chariot. You can't. The angels, the malachim, and the complete human form. Those are things that you cannot sculpt. And then drawing is much more limited, but meaning anything two-dimensional is you can't depict the sun, the moon, the stars. But that's if it's for educational purposes, then you are. Okay, so these are kind of like the basic parameters. Basically, sculpture is much more stringent. And there's a big body of halachic work on these topics, on what is allowed and what's not allowed. But more than that, we know that art in general was also co-opted for idolatry. So idolatry, we're by the way, even in this the strict sense of the word, a bust, for example, is not a problem. To have a bust of a human head, that's not a problem halachically. But because you won't find it in you walk into my house, you're not going to find a bust of a person. It's just not something that we do. So Jews always basically stayed away from that.
Why is that not a problem though?
Because it says, it's very particular, it's the whole human form. It's yeah. So then, if it's not the angels, it's that type of thing. So just a human, a full human head, not a problem. If you missing an arm, whatever. Meaning those types of things. If it's, by the way, if it's abstract, also adds already, because is that even a human form? So these are open questions that are discussed, but. In general, we are, and then of course, idolatry made it much more suspicious, because idolatry is, you have idols that are there, that are second. Now, in addition to the problem of idolatry, and then, which was followed, by the way, by Christianity, of course, you also had the fact that by the time that the 18th century, the 19th century came about, Jews who are venturing towards art are obviously leaving behind, the traditional. So they were converting to Christianity. They are at the very least cutting their ties to their community on their own. So these are kind of taken together. These are the inherent problems with art, and that therefore this is what creates the fact that there is a conflict for Handel and for other people who are very involved with Jewish life, but have they can't seem to move along. And if you look back at our history, Jews did not only art was basically not prized by the Jews to a great extent, by the Jewish people. So you have the Beis Hamikdash that was built in a very beautiful way. You have synagogues that were built throughout the ages. You have handiworks, like crafts, but it's not art those are pretty things that are made. They're crafts that are made to decorate, to ornament. It's not art for art's sake. Literature, yes. In all forms, poetry, there's ancient poetry. Art itself is not the way of expressing yourself through art for the sake of art, of hanging a painting or a sculpture, in your house. That wasn't the Jewish form for all of these reasons. What the Rebbe does, and in a way, so the Marc Chagall left the shtetl, right? So the fact that up until World War II, the people who were successful, the Jewish artists who were successful, were cutting their ties to their roots. And the Rebbe articulates something which is completely new after World War II. And the Rebbe says, we know b'chol derechecha de'eu, know him in all your ways. And yes, there is a way to use art for, not only can it be permissible, but in fact, it can actually be the way for this person, for an individual, to serve God. And actually, I'll quote from a letter that the Rebbe wrote to an artist. He explained that the same way that Judaism, that all the aspects of physical life, including eating, drinking, etc., and certainly aspects connected with the emotions, such as in art, can and should be elevated to a higher spiritual level if carried out in accordance with Mosaic law. So the Rebbe says very clearly, there is a way to do this. The Baal Shem Tov is the one who showed us this way, and there's absolutely a way, and that's what we're gonna articulate. One more letter that the Rebbe wrote to a young woman who's asking about the permissibility of art, and the Rebbe explains they're very simple. An artist, male or female, has a wide variety of ways to utilize his or her talents to their fullest extent, without trespassing on the laws of the Torah, which is the Torah of life, i.e., instructions for life in this world. On the contrary, through the visual arts, one can add enthusiasm as well as a deeper understanding in matters of the world in general, and in particular, a deeply felt understanding of the words of Israel's composers of sweet songs. How manifold are your works, God. Okay, so the Rebbe says extremely clearly that there is a way forward. One more thing that we want to tackle is the fact that the outside world also did not view Hasidic art as a real thing. Like, what can Hasidic art actually be? I'll show you. This is from later. This is from the Village Voice in 1977. There was a Hasidic art exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum. And the Village Voice, to its, in its style, goes, are these relatively drab-looking, strict people allowed to indulge in such colorful work? That's the question of the Village Voice. Like, are these draft Chassidim allowed to do this in the first place? The question is, it's superficial, but really what it's saying is, how can somebody who's bound by certain rules, if art is a inner expression of who you are, unbounded expression of your inner soul, then how are you able to, somebody who lives by certain rules and has to, right? We have all these rules of what is allowed and what isn't allowed. How is that possible? How is it possible for that person to actually be a true artist? So it's, what you're doing is maybe illustrating, maybe it's propaganda, but this is not actual art, which is like a true expression. And the Rebbe, of course, rejects all of this. And we're going to go back to now I just want to point out one thing also, that Chassidus itself, the idea of, the Baal Shem Tov revealed himself, the founder of the Hasidic movement, the Baal Shem Tov revealed himself in 1736. And at that time, he, we're going to, before we move on to where the Rebbe's contribution is, he is the first who says, basically brings creativity into active Jewish life. And he says that, no, it's not only those who, sit for X amount of time and study Torah all day. You can access God through stories, through prayer, just even extended prayer, simple prayer, interpersonal conversations, like just in your day-to-day life, there's a way to actually connect to God. And stories and song is, of course, something which goes back to the beginning of the times of Baal Shem Tov. So we're talking about creativity, another way of accessing the Rebbe would speak often about the fifth Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab, that he was in Paris on more than one occasion, and he went to the Louvre to gaze at three paintings. And he looked at three paintings and he stood there and he contemplated them. And then afterwards he came back and spoke to his son and successor, the sixth Rebbe, and was able to, and spoke about the kind of the ideas that he, looking at these old masters. I'm not sure which painting. I think there's people who have tried to figure out what they are. I don't know what they are. So it's not really, in Chassidus, it's already, you can see that there is something which is much more acceptable about this, just even between the art and the music, between music, and stories and creativity in general. So being able to identify that there's something to be learned over here, this is something that we already have from Baal Shem Tov. We come to America. America is a new world. The Rebbe is at first placed at, this is 1940. The Rebbe is not yet the Rebbe. The Rebbe would become the Rebbe in 1950. But at this time, he was in charge of publications. And one of them was called Talks and Tales. And you can see that he hired a teenage artist named Michael Schwartz. And these are just two examples that I was able to see. But an interesting point where the Rebbe was explaining to him what he needs to, kind of the style that he's interested in seeing. And Schwartz said that he remembers the Rebbe saying, Dick Tracy, that it should look like Dick Tracy. That's what the Rebbe wants him to do. And the artist, Michael Schwartz, was a young, he was 16, 17, 18, I think, when he started working for Chabad. He said that it was very clear that the Rebbe wanted for children, he saw that the visual representation as very important for children to be able to see. Like this is how they're able to learn. And I think that Michael Schwartz actually went on to do, serious art, but you see that that's already the seed of what comes soon. The same way that children are able to look into, to understand something, perceive it through, the visuals. Your adults have a way of accessing ideas through visual arts as well. Okay, so in 1950, the sixth Rebbe passes away, and the Rebbe becomes the Rebbe. 1 year later, he formally accepts leadership of the Chabad movement, and that is Yud Shvat, the 10th of Shvat, 1951. The anniversary was just this past week. the 75th anniversary since the Rebbe accepted leadership. The Rebbe said a mimer, a discourse, a Hasidic discourse based on what his father-in-law's last Hasidic discourse, which is Basi Lagani. And Basi Lagani is very much about discovering or bringing God down into this world. This is the seventh generation. This is about revealing God within it. And the Rebbe says, this is an English quote from towards the end of the discourse. Indeed, the dwelling made for God in this world through the subordination and transformation of materiality, so that the Creator can say, I have returned to my garden. The words are Basi Lagani, come and enter my garden, is superior to that which existed before the sin of the tree of knowledge. So the Rebbe is speaking about revealing this world to be an actual garden of God, and that is by subordinating the actual material world and not just talking about the spiritual and the material, but seeing it over here as well. Around this time, the Rebbe writes to the aforementioned Lieberman. So Lieberman had been in Paris and went to London, and he was living in London at this time, still very much depressed. And the Rebbe writes him a letter around about March 1951, maybe 2 months after he formally accepted leadership. The Rebbe explains to him what's the role of an artist. What does the artist do? The primary ability of an artist is his ability to step away from the externalities of the thing and, disregarding its outer form, gaze into its innerness and perceive its essence, and to be able to convey this in his painting. Thus, the object is revealed as it has never been seen, since its inner content was obscured by secondary things. The artist exposes the essence of the thing he portrays, causing the one who looks at the painting to perceive it in another, truer light, and to realize that his prior perception was deficient. The Rebbe explains to him that what you need to do is to look at the world as you see it and to share it with the other. This is your mission. Yes, it wasn't done before, but this is your way today. The Rebbe told him that everyone has a certain allotted task, and I know that it wasn't like that before, that you to be able to use art, but you have this very unique way, and you need to use it. From the start, and this is, Handel Lieberman came around 1952. He came to New York at the end of 1951. And what's very interesting to note is that very quickly, he's penniless, Russian Hasidic artist, he starts getting press. You see, this is in the forward. Barinter Mahler, who became a famous painting. They did an entire spread on his work. So at the same time as the Rebbe started articulating a vision of what Hasidic art might look like, he starts actually pushing it tactically. And you see that the article actually describes Lieberman being brought to the office of the Forward on the Lower East Side by, it says, Chaim Lieberman, who was a polemicist, not related actually, a polemicist who wrote a lot and was not a stranger in 770 at Chabad. So you can see the kind of the connections between him being brought there. This is a penniless man. The first profile of Handel Lieberman in America was actually about less than a week after he arrived on American shores. So you see something is all going on very, very quickly. You see, this is a Lieberman, this painting over here. This is a Lieberman painting. Okay. Another Hasidic artist that we're going to discuss is named Zalman Kleinman. Zalman Kleinman was somebody from a different era, born in 1933 in the Soviet Union. And And he was orphaned at a very young age. He was painting also from as a child. He says that he would see the paint he would see the superintendent of his apartment building as a child growing up in Leningrad. And he would just like watching the paint. The guy would be painting it red for May Day, in celebration of the Soviet Victory Day. And he would be watching the paint, and he just watch the red paint, and he liked that just tactically. And then he went to, he was orphaned at a young age. He ended up being adopted rather than living he almost risked being sent to an orphanage, and he was adopted by a Lubavitcher Hasidic couple, Nachum Shmaryo Sasanko and his wife. When they got he lived also in Samarkand, escaped the Soviet Union in 1946, came to Israel. And he's born in 1933, so around 1950-51, he, his also the same type of thing. He's showing his artistic mettle. He's interested in this. And Sasanko, his adopted father, his foster father, is an older man from a different generation, and he's very worried seeing this young man going into, and he wrote to the Rebbe asking, "What do I do? And just in terms of this child's education, how do I deal with this?" The Rebbe responded by saying he needs to be evaluated. If he has actual talent, then he needs to be able to pursue it. And very shortly afterwards, you see a letter already. Obviously, he seems to have been evaluated. This is a very famous piece from Chaslavich and Lubavitch, but this is a much earlier piece, which I think is better. And this is from the 50s in Kfar Chabad. He started having a name. Zalman Shazar, the president of Israel, came to Kfar Chabad and was like taken by the scene of this little, this yeshiva student in a red beard painting in his room. And the Rebbe wrote to him a letter around this time, also encouraging him to continue with his work, telling him suggesting that he paint the scenes of Kfar Chabad, of the village that he was living in, not only of kind of spiritual scenes of life in a shul, but also the mundane. Both of them, the Rebbe emphasized that it should be you want life within them. And what's interesting there that the Rebbe says that, and you do it simply in a way of that depicts real life, kind of not abstract is the way that I took that. And I think that, as we'll see a little bit later, that doesn't mean that the Rebbe is interested more in depiction, and that it should be, but abstract art has a place. But I think that we're talking about something very specific for this artist, Zalman Kleiman, that kind of your way is not in the abstract, which I think if you look at his attempts at that makes sense. Now, throughout this time, Lieberman was in New York, is already exhibiting. He was in some very famous galleries in Manhattan. The New York Times covered his work, and there's even letters from the Rebbe to Jewish community centers from those early years, asking them to, or trying to get them to display his work. By 1967, there is this is a kind of another milestone. There's already a Hasidic art exhibit in Detroit that was held in Detroit. And you can see that the two artists who are featured are Handel Lieberman, Hanoch Handel Lieberman's name is, and Zalman Kleiman. And it was opened by Jacques Lifshitz, the very famous sculptor. And there's a letter on the table that you can see that was written for this, if you have it, that was written for this exhibit in particular. And this represents already kind of a new stage where you see the Rebbe starting to articulate what it is that Hasidic art really is, kind of the purpose of it, and what the idea is. You see in the last paragraph, about 6 lines from the top. The point is that those who have been divinely gifted in art, whether sculpture or painting and the like, have the privilege of being able to convert an inanimate thing, such as a brush, paint, and canvas, or wood and stone, into living form. In a deeper sense, it is the ability to transform to a certain extent the material into spiritual, even where the creation is in still life, and certainly where the artistic work has to do with living creatures and humans. How much more so if the art medium is used to advance ideas, especially reflecting Torah and mitzvahs, which would raise the artistic skill to its highest value, to its highest level. So you see that what's happening here is that the Rebbe is continuing on this path towards defining what it is and encouraging its creation. Here you see that for that exhibit in particular, this is Hendel Lieberman at that time. This is the Rebbe sent to Rabbi Krinsky, his secretary, to open the proceedings. So the Rebbe placed a lot of a high emphasis on this event, and this is the opening of what is, the first Hasidic art exhibit. Probably there was another few of them that followed shortly afterwards. Now, in 1977, you see another step in this, which was this Hasidic art exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum. Again, the Rebbe's fingerprints are all over it, in the sense that the Rebbe says, supported the artists who were going there, gave his active blessing. Let's see in the Village Voice piece. Our spiritual, this is about that exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum. Our spiritual leader, Rebbe Schneerson, even gave a warm blessing to the project because it feels it will help Jews from many different viewpoints to understand and appreciate the nature of Hasidism. So you see that the Rebbe is moving everything in this direction. At the same time, about a month after or a few months after the Brooklyn Museum exhibit opened, this is what it looks like today. But the Hasidic Art gallery in Crown Heights opened up. This is Zev Markowitz, who has directed it ever since, and art classes began there. So besides the fact that it was supporting these artists, so the Rebbe basically from the Brooklyn Museum to an actual gallery, which was by far, for certainly the first Hasidic art gallery in history. The Rebbe keeps on giving more and more platforms for the exhibition of this type of art. During this time also, the Rebbe is speaking to, there was an artist, Yossi Rosenstein in Israel, who was here, was in a private audience with the Rebbe, and asks the Rebbe kind of direction, was looking for the direction in his life. The Rebbe suggested that he open up an art school. And he ended up opening up a string of art schools, which were designed to be in a Jewish setting in a way that is appropriate for which means appropriate means what they're drawing. The scene meaning there's tactics of art. There's how to actually learn how to draw, and then there is what you're doing, and then there's a whole culture of it, and kind of there is a way of doing it in a Jewish way that is modest and accept, but you can actually be a full artist. Now, I wanted to point out one more thing, that with all of the Hendel Lieberman was receiving this help in terms of his publicity. So this is the original forward article from 1952, and I was looking at it to try to footnote it. And to me, it seemed interesting, at least, that I looked at the date, and it was February 6, 1952, which is actually Yud Shvat, the 10th of Shvat of that year, Tafshin Yud Beis, which was the first anniversary since the Rebbe had formally accepted leadership. So the idea of Hasidic art, the idea of transforming the material into the spiritual, as the Rebbe mentions in this Detroit letter, which is baked into his first discourse and kind of the mission statement for the generation, is also already visible, within art. And whether this is a coincidence or not, I don't know. But bottom line is that this was there. So, what is, we're talking about kind of the makings of it, but what actually becomes, I think that if when you go back, you're able to articulate 5 kind of stages towards what is Hasidic art in the Rebbe's view. So the first is that Hasidic art is that which is created by the Jewish artist who, drawing on his own life experience and journey, looks on the gross mundane world, strips away the externalities, and reveals it to be God's, right? That's what you see. He writes to Handel Lieberman about stripping away the layers. Now, a prerequisite is to be able to recognize that this is, that the gift is something that comes from God. And who therefore, and God who gave you this gift, gave you certain rules. That's the halacha part of it. And then in order to be able to create, you need to, why does the Jewish artist need this? Because his soul is, you're as a Jew, an artist needs to express his soul. The Jewish artist needs to express his Jewish soul. And then there's communication, and communication is very, very key. In all these circumstances, you want, whether it's Lieberman, whether it's Kleinman, all these artists, the Rebbe is constantly encouraging them to communicate their unique vision. This is a painting by Handel Lieberman. He presented it it's an abstract painting. It's a flow of colors. He presented it to the Rebbe in the 60s, just as a kind of ran it by. He showed most of his art to the Rebbe. And it was untitled at the time. The Rebbe tells him, take away the untitled, and the Rebbe actually gave it a name: Creation, Past, and Future. You see right away, there's communication is the key. What you need is that for the viewer, when they walk into a room and they see this painting, at the very least, they're able to look at the note card on the side, and they're able to position themselves, and instead of trying to look into the artist, what is the artist thinking, you're now positioning them in a way that they're able to see something and learn something and gain something for themselves. This is the cover of a book by the artist Yaakov Agam. Now, this is, of course, an expressionist piece. It could be anything, right? So when you see a scene of a mother lighting candles or a dancing Simchat Torah in shul, those are pretty clear, and they're communicating something, and it's understandable to the viewer. This is not, but that doesn't mean it can't actually communicate. This is a book by the artist Yaakov Agam, who's a kinetic sculptor. He's still alive. Very original, and you see that his I should have included another example of his art, but it's unique. In the opening of the book, he writes to the Rebbe this dedication. to Rabbi Schneerson, right? In the yellow, which is the kind of the letters of light, he writes to Rabbi Schneerson on the occasion of his birthday, with blessings, with faithful blessings. And then in blue, which is the shadow of the light, right? He writes a much deeper message, which is to the esteemed leader of the generation, the light unto Israel, who blesses his faithful with hope and then with great respect. And then he has his signature. And it actually echoes very much his own work, which is plays with light and shadow. And the Rebbe makes a very an amazing point and explains that shadow at first glance is the absence of light, right? Light is good, and shadow, the absence of light, is the opposite. According to the Torah, which states that everything, this is a translation of the letter, that everything the Creator made in His world, He made for His glory, this includes shadow. This means that if one places the shadow in its appropriate form and its appropriate place, then it too becomes a source of positive influence, just like light. So you see in this already that there's many ways to use this, and you have all these different paths. Now, this is already a sculpture that Yaakov Agam made also, which is the menorah on Fifth Avenue, and Yaakov Agam designed that for, and it's there. And in a way, this is saying the same thing. It's a sculpture, it's a menorah, it's sculpture. Which brings us now to an artist, Baruch Nachshon. Baruch Nachshon is probably the first artist who we can say, as a Hasidic artist, he doesn't start, rather than a Hasid who is attracted to art, he was an artist who is attracted to Hasidism. He's a Sabra, born in Israel. He was born in a modern Israeli background. Was first came to the Rebbe in 1964 from Israel. Was in correspondence for a long time, but didn't come for many years. And when he came, he had a private audience with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe tells him, the world of art hasn't been corrected until now, and it is your job to correct it. And he stayed in New York for 2 years, received a stipend from the Rebbe he came with his wife actually and child, and received a stipend in order to live, and he studied. In the beginning, the Rebbe told him he needs to do it correct. He asked, well, how do I do this correctly? How do I correct? What is correction, tikkun of art? What does the correction of art mean? The Rebbe says, speak to a rabbi. So he spoke to two rabbis, the rabbi of Crown Heights and another rabbi in the New York City area. And they explained to him the parameters of what it means. It means, modest classes and kind of not only what you're studying, but how you're studying it. Okay, so he starts looking for it, and he ended up being connected to a sculptor named Chaim Gross. He came to Chaim Gross and asked for kind of the course of study. Chaim Gross tells him, and I think what was included was not necessarily okay according to the code of Jewish law. And he said, "I'm sorry, I'm out." And Chaim Gross told him, "Look, the Lubavitcher Rebbe knows halacha. Chaim Gross knows art. You wanna join? You're welcome to. But this is the way that you go." And he didn't do it, and he instead found a kind of an appropriate course of study at the School of Visual Art in Manhattan, and that's where he went. And then he went back to New York, back to Israel, and kind of this is his style. As it's abstract. It's more it's different, but this too is Hasidic art in the form that in the sense that it's communicating something to the viewer that they're able to see. In 1978, Chaim Gross, Baruch Nachshon came back to New York to try to to sell some of his work. He came to the Rebbe. He was explaining to him that he's not doing very well financially, trying to sell his work. And the Rebbe suggested that he makes an exhibit in 770 in Chabad headquarters at 770, which he was, shocked to do. The Rebbe told him to make sure that there are, again, note cards that explain what the piece of art is, and also price tags. The Rebbe wanted him to have price tags because that's something that he was missing. Baruch Nachman's a very interesting character in that when I was saying that he was an artist that came to Hasidism, I saw in an interview where he says, people started asking what year did this happen, and he said, I don't know numbers. Numbers are I don't know I know my military ID number, Israeli military ID number, and that's it. Everything else, like numbers, don't work for me. So very, very pure. Now, at the end of this exhibit, and the Rebbe went himself and spent 45 minutes looking at the art, explaining to him. And I think that some of the highlights of the most important thing that the Rebbe was pointing out various things on the different paintings. But at the end, they came back to the Rebbe's study and said, the Rebbe told him, until now you've been successful at portraying the Jewish soul, but the Jew has a body as well, and you need to kind of bring it down to earth. And after that, he started focusing on less esoteric and less mystical scenes, and trying to bring it down in a way, because communication is very, very key to the artist and to the Rebbe's viewpoint of what this is meant to be.
Where exactly was that?
Where is this in 770? It's in the offices upstairs in 770. I think it was like Haas, the book publisher. I think they had some kind of storage room that was very quickly emptied out, and the art was hung up over there. And again, there's a tape, there's a recording of it. There isn't a videotape of it, but you can hear there on the recording. The Rebbe spent 45 minutes with him and giving detailed instructions on kind of whatever his observations of it. Very, very unique. Okay. So Jacques Lifshitz was a name that we mentioned before. Jacques Lifshitz was born in the Russian Empire, in Lithuania, a place called Druskininkai today. He, in the 20s, was with Modigliani in Paris, with Picasso in Paris. Very, very kind of first-rate artist, really. But a sculptor. He came to the Rebbe in the late 50s for the first time. The Rebbe had a correspondence, knew his mother from Druskininkai. They had stayed in the sixth Rebbe had stayed in the hotel that his mother owned over there. And but he came because he got very, very ill in America. This is in New York. Jacques Lifshitz fell very, very ill, and in 1958 he came to. He fell ill. His wife asked for a blessing from the Rebbe. They got the bracha, they got the blessing, and when he felt that he had miraculously gotten better, and he came to the Rebbe to say thank you. Rabbi Krinsky actually recently told me that it was very rare. It was a daytime appointment, meaning the Rebbe's appointments, private audiences with the Rebbe were generally at night, almost exclusively at night, sometimes 2, 3, 4 in the morning. His was during the day, and that was something which is very rare. See, this is his book, a biography of him, which he inscribes to the Rebbe, from our beloved Rebbe, with admiration and respect, Chaim Yaakov Lifshitz. And it's in the library of Agudas Hasidic Chabad. This is him at work in the studio in New York. And these are actually two examples of prints that he gave to the Rebbe. There are I think on both of these are inscriptions inscribed to the Rebbe. Now, Jacques Lifshitz obviously presents a very interesting question because he's a sculptor and an abstract sculptor, but this is already, we're kind of moving on to another step where the Rebbe is not only encouraging, artists to paint, but also to actually sculpt. Just for the purpose of the sculpture, I want to bring us just to a side note. A woman named Erna, I think it's Weil, probably like the watch, like Raymond Weil. Erna Weil. There's a series of letters between the Rebbe and Jacques Lifshitz, and it begins with two letters that were actually to Erna Weil. But sent copies were, CC'd Jacques Lifshitz. And she was a German Jewish sculptress. She came to America in the 30s, before the war. I'm not sure how she first connected with the Rebbe, but ended up being in close contact for many, many, many years. High level, not Jacques Lifshitz, but somebody who was, and she came, and initially, I think 1958, 59, she asked the Rebbe, for advice. Basically, she came with her husband and asked for advice on how to sculpt the Baal Shem Tov. This is what she was interested in, which is for everything that we know about sculpture in Jewish law is a very revolutionary. The Rebbe's answer is going to be a revolutionary one. So I'm going to quote from the Rebbe's letter. To be sure, an artist has the prerogative of certain so-called artistic license and may use his imagination in a work of art representing a person according to his mind, especially where no authentic likeness exists, as in the case of the Baal Shem Tov. However, I safely assume that in your sculpture you wished to represent in a symbolic way the ideological person, namely the founder of the Hasidic movement. Hence, it should be borne in mind that the soul of Hasidism is ecstasy and inspiration, and the ability to see even in simple material objects the divine spark and the divine light, which is their true reality. Such ideas would be reflected, as might well be imagined, in rather refined facial features, which express a longing for the sublime, together with profound inner spiritual strength, coupled with serenity and gentleness. Thus, one would imagine the Baal Shem Tov to be a patriarchal type with a flowing beard and perhaps disheveled locks of the head, crowning highly refined facial features. For a Rebbe, to be giving detailed kind of advice on how this woman should sculpt the Baal Shem Tov of all people is obviously very revolutionary. At the same time, and in the follow-up letter, the Rebbe says everything needs to be done specifically, like if you want to do this as a Jewish artist and as a successful Jewish artist, then it needs to be done in the Jewish way. And the Rebbe wrote there, I emphasize this point because the subject under discussion is an art which is connected with the basic prohibition of idolatry, and which, on the other hand, if utilized in a way which accords with the Torah, could have strong impact on the emotional world of the sensitive beholder and inspire him. At the same time, it is a well-known principle of our living Torah that the end does not justify the means. So and then the Rebbe finishes off the letter that we're the individual, the artist, and in other cases, but the artist in particular, where they have resolved to be guided by the Torah, they found their road much easier than anticipated, and it has brought them more peace and harmony than they thought possible. So here the Rebbe is articulating something very clear, that yes, you're an artist. Yes, you have the ability, and indeed, if you have the ability, therefore, then you have the responsibility to depict the world and to teach people about something deeper about their Judaism, but it needs to be done in a certain context. It needs to be done in following the certain rules that are the rules of your soul, that's kind of the parameters of the Jewish of the Jew. So you want to express your soul, it needs to be done in the way that God, who gave you these gifts, is asking you. Which leads us to, Jacques Lifshitz, the Rebbe encouraged The Rebbe told him, there's nothing wrong with your sculptures. I've seen them. Actually, there are many people who their only access to Judaism is through your sculptures, through seeing your work. This is very, very important. Then in the early 60s, I think it was 61, he decided that he's going to donate a sculpture garden to Jerusalem. There was an entrepreneur from New York, actually a showman, like a show business figure, who decided, Billy Rose, his name was, and he was going to make a sculpture garden in Jerusalem. I think it actually ended up happening. And Jacques Lifshitz was going to donate his sculptures there, or donate to this project. And the Rebbe writes to him, discouraging him over a period of 2 years. And the argument itself is very interesting in that the Rebbe says, what you're doing over here is wrong from the artistic point of view. All art needs to be in the correct context. Jerusalem has always been the place of monotheism, the center of monotheism. And for you to be putting sculpture into the it's wrong from the it's always rejected sculpture, and therefore to build this sculpture garden in Jerusalem is wrong from an aesthetic point of view. It's just there's a dissonance here. The Rebbe went back and forth on this for 2 years. Let's quote from one letter, because I think this is one of the concluding letters in the exchange. Your suggestion to leave our divergent views, this is the Rebbe writing to Jacques Lifshitz, your suggestion to leave our divergent views to the Supreme Judge is something that I cannot accept, since it is not a matter of theoretical difference, nor am I God's policeman. I'm hopeful that both of us will, for many years to come, do our share to spread Yiddishkeit and strengthen our traditions. But I considered it my duty to try to prevent a Jew from doing something which, in my opinion, was not recommendable, especially a Jew who is close to my heart. Anyway, this is actually the last letter in that exchange. But the Rebbe was very supportive of him, and yet when it comes to even a hint of crossing that line, this is something that he wouldn't accept. Which for a while, as I was working on this article, I was very interested in kind of the place of sculpture in particular. So the Rebbe articulates this, that what is the as we read in this letter, right? It's spiritualizing gross matter. What is the Jew doing? What's the Thank you. What does the Jew do? This is what we do through Torah mitzvahs, right? When we take the tefillin, the leather of the tefillin, we put it on, we're spiritualizing the leather, and et cetera. When we drink water, whatever it is that we're doing, we're putting it, we're spiritualizing the world. And the Rebbe explains that that's what's happening in through the artistic process as well. You're actually taking, physical matter. You're taking a paintbrush, you're taking paint, you're taking a wood or stone, and you're creating a living being. Something that's in the first letter that the Rebbe sent to Jacques Lifshitz. This is back in 1959. The Rebbe says, "I'm sending you a pair of tefillin," which they had discussed in the meeting. In their initial meeting, the Rebbe asked him to do two things, which was, I think, divorce his first wife, according to, he was married a second time, and to give her a get, his first wife a get. She hadn't, hadn't gone through the process of a religious divorce, which is what he did with an Orthodox rabbi. And the second thing was to start putting on tefillin every single day. And he agreed on both points. And the Rebbe sent him tefillin. And you see in that letter, you see that now I have your address. I'm sending you the pair of tefillin. And the Rebbe explains what is tefillin. Tefillin is very similar to sculpture. So, second, sorry. So the Jew, by putting on tefillin, what do? We're taking our emotions, we're taking our intellect, our emotions, we're binding them in the service of God. We're submitting them to the supreme authority, the creator and master of the universe. And by fulfilling the divine will and shaping our lives accordingly, we're transcending the gap between creator and created and uniting with God. Elevating at the same time. So the individual is elevating at the same time his part of the physical world in which he lives. This, in fact, is the deeper meaning of the divine precepts. And the awareness of this enables man to strive constantly for the supremacy of mind over matter and spiritualize gross matter. The sculptor in his art offers a ready parallel. For he, even more than the artist who paints, takes a shapeless piece of gross matter, whether stone, wood, or metal, and gives it form and idea which belong entirely in the realm of the spiritual, and thus breathing a spirit and vitality into something which was no more than a lump of matter before. The Jew does the same. When the artist goes and does, and as we saw in the Detroit letter, when this causes, so the artist takes matter. He creates something that inspires a Jew or any person to do a good deed. That person then is actually sculpting or creating art by taking and doing a mitzvah that they've been inspired by. And in that exhibit in 1967 in Detroit, where Jacques Lifshitz attended, Jacques Lifshitz shared something with the crowd. He said that the Rebbe asked me to put on tefillin, and it says every artist needs inspiration to start off. You know, every morning you wake up, you need something to be inspired by. For me, it's the tefillin that I put on every morning. So you have complete circle. Jacques Lifshitz, who the Rebbe gave the tefillin to, is inspired by the tefillin that he's given, creates something that hopefully will inspire a Jew to do something that is fulfilling the necessity of the world, what's needed in the world of spiritualizing gross material matter, and therefore creating a complete circle. And just to finish off, that the Rebbe didn't have, as far as I know, there was no art anywhere. In the Rebbe's room, certainly there wasn't anything hanging on the wall. In the Rebbe's house, from what I know, there was no art. But there was a small apartment in that the Rebbe and the Rebbitzin would go to for holiday meals, kind of near the library at 1070, and standing there was a sculpture by Jacques Lifshitz that Jacques Lifshitz had gifted him. Anyway, that's what we got for tonight. Thank you very much.
Australia, and Emily's sister lived there, and he was coming to visit her, and the Rebbe told him he had to make an exhibit in Australia to show him art. So I remember, I don't know how old I was, and maybe it was a young teenager, like 12, 13. And I saw his art, and you see the typical Hasidic scenes, and then you see the abstract, and it's just so interesting to me to see a guy with a long beard, and he's an artist, and he doesn't just do the typical kind of art, all kinds of art.
So I don't know, with every person, it was very interesting to see what the Rebbe's reactions to their work is. So, and it's difficult to, I tried setting out what are the parameters kind of more generally, but with each person, it's very clear. So with Zalman Kleinman, it was clear that the Rebbe was suggesting to him kind of details. with Jacques Lifshitz, the Rebbe didn't tell him make things in a more to depict things. He says things in a much more general way. My understanding, this is what I read and I quoted, that the Rebbe's favorite piece of Handel Lieberman's was the abstract one. Whether, the argument could be made, the Rebbe certainly had creation, yeah. Again, I don't know if that's true, but this is what I read, and I quoted that. But it's not with children's art. It was very like the Rebbe didn't want kids to to see like pictures with very gross, kind of very cartoonish people who are kind of grotesque in any way. So there's kind of like more parameters to that. But in general, in art, especially when you're talking about, basically the last thing that you can do is tell an artist what to do. So the Rebbe is trying to kind of direct them towards in a direction, but not like of the details. With Chassidim, just like Chassidim write in and then ask which house they should buy, or should I change jobs? So if they're asking, then the Rebbe is going to give an answer. So with Zalman Kleiman, there was that. Anyway, so there is definitely, and with Baruch Nachshon also there was. I don't think anything that he can do is very is straight. He never did anything, but like he was looking for something that would kind of bring them down to earth a little bit, and I think that's what he got. But in terms of the actual style, you can see that it's open to anything, and they'll play around with a lot of different styles throughout his life, including the abstract.
Talk more about the one of the Friedrich Rebbe that Handel did.
He did. It's called Histalkus. Called the Stalkus. You see, this is probably where in the forward. This is probably the pencil drawing. He had a sketch of that, and it's depicting. It's a very haunting painting that's depicting the passing of the sixth Rebbe. You could see. This is the Rebbe Rashab. This is his father, the fifth Rebbe. I'm assuming that you have the Alter Rebbe. I don't know who that. I don't know what that is in the corner, but it was from that period. I'd say it's probably painted early 50s. But that was his Stalkos.
That the female sculptor ever made that image of also did she ever do it?
He made something, but I couldn't figure out the timeline, whether that was an earlier attempt. She was very interesting because it looks like she had a lot of difficulties in her life, like emotional difficulties. She came with her husband. She was in touch with her Rebbe for decades. And there are some letters from the Rebbe. First of all, what I understand is that she passed away in the 90s with like all the Rebbe's letters like next to her. And then, but she's writing to the Rebbe.
He wasn't even religious.
No, she lived in Tina.
Had a connection to the Rebbe.
Yeah, she sent a brooch for the Rebbitzin, and the Rebbe writes her a letter saying, "Thank you very much. My wife really likes the brooch." And that's like early 80s. The Rebbe wrote to her. She was asking about like social services for like I think a child of hers, and the Rebbe was writing like, "Okay, you check with local, the local rabbinate and the JCC and whatever. They usually have lists of this. I'm gonna check on my end." The Rebbe was like holding her hand for many years, and you can see actually in the sculpture, it's very clear like where she's asking about the sculpting. Also, Rebbe saying that it will make your like when you are doing it in this way, then it will make your life. She's a real artist also, and it will make things go easier for you. Like the blessings and the creativity are going to come in a much smoother way, and you'll be more fulfilled. There's with her, there's a lot of unexplored, I think, area for sure.
And Zalman Kleiman, I heard you talk about Zalman Kleiman, having a vision of a painting that he wanted to.
Right. Right. Which is very, the Rebbe told them, don't say that photographs are enough, right? And in general, I mean, obviously, if you look at art, obviously art and a painting is different than a photograph. So he described, he was a real artist, Zalman Kleiman. And that, he went really, truth be told, that this was him at kind of an earlier stage. And he went in this direction because it was what sold better this sold, I don't know if it actually sold, but it was rumored to have sold for $500,000 recently. So whether it did or it didn't, his work, sells for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And he went this way because this is what would sell. And then now people have there's definitely circles that have a wider appreciation for general art because they got into, through him. Now, Zalman Kleiman speaks about this piece that he's dreaming of. He describes outside of the Rebbe's room, right? So it was called Gan Eden HaTachten. It is called Gan Eden HaTachten, the lower Gan Eden. And this is the antechamber to the Rebbe's room. And this is the term for the antechamber to the Rebbe's room for the entire Chabad history. Wherever it was, in Russia or in New York, this is where, so a chassid walks into it, any individual walks into a private audience with the Rebbe, and then they come out. And what's going on in that room, right? There's one guy who's waiting to go in, another person who has just come out and is ecstatic by his encounter with the Rebbe. And there's the people who are waiting to go in have their fears, their future, their children. There's all sorts of their living, everything that's going on in their head, and they're not able to. And they're there. This is what they're thinking about. So he said, "What do I do? How do I depict this? I can take a photograph, but what is it? What's this room? The room is, chairs, a bench, a table, individuals. But how do you describe the feeling of that room?" And I read an interview where he describes that, and he didn't try making that painting for another 4 or 5 years. So depicting what you see, kind of stripping away what the Rebbe spoke about, stripping away the externalities and showing what's actually there is kind of the mission of any artist. And for the Jew, that has a particular meaning.
But he did do it. He did make the painting, right?
He did do it. I should have included it.
I think it's.
Yichidus.
I sent it to someone.
He has another. Okay, I can't look it up. He has actually, so the one of the chassid climbing up the ladder. There's a chassid climbing up a ladder into the heavens, and at the bottom of the ladder is his wife, like a pregnant wife being pulled by and she's like, look at the ladder, the guy, he's going up into the heavens, and she's with the pregnant and with the kid pulling at her skirt. It's a good one.
Good story.
That's
Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, David.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you everyone for coming, braving the so much snow outside. Perfect show.
Talking about people from Montreal, and things like that.